to do and some cases what not to do in Korea. So we're going to focus more on my experiences, and I'll give you a lot of personal examples along the way of things that I've learned and things that I've learned not to do. So I'll give you some insight on that, but a few of the other things that we'll talk about is I want this to be more of an interactive discussion. So if you have questions or comments or experiences that you have had, please share them with the rest of the group here. We don't have a very large group. I'd say 100, that's pretty good. So if you do have a question, I would like to pass the mic back. I don't want to make this a very lecture style, more of an informal, if you know what I mean. I'm not good at the formal thing, trust me. So you heard about me. 2002, I moved to Korea. I started just as any other English teacher out there, although I was a lot greener than most of them. What I mean by that is I had not a clue about Korea. I knew where it was. I had thought that a lot of people wore rice hats like they did in Vietnam. That was my first impression. I didn't have any idea. I had no idea what I was in for. I opened up my guidebook to the first page, and of course the first thing they teach you how to say is hello, right? Everybody knows how to say hello in Korean? All right, good. Okay, so you know that it's about yay long when you spell it in English, right? I'm reading it with my friend. How do you say this? I'm sitting across from him on the subway in the TTC in Toronto. I'm thinking, Annyeong, ha, and I couldn't even finish the sentence. I couldn't even finish the word. That's how green I was. I hadn't taken a culture class. I wasn't even aware that they had them at that time. I hadn't taken a language class, nothing. So I really was green. Not a clue. I get off the plane, and the first thing, I'm greeted by our new manager. The manager says to me, "You must be Randy." And he holds out one hand, and he shakes my hand with the other one. It was the two-handed handshake, and I thought, it's a little odd. We'll get into that a little bit later as well. But there was all kinds of these personal experiences that I had. So I'll share a lot of them with you today. But before I start, I want to ask, how many people in the room have been to Korea before? Oh, wow, okay. Anybody been to Korea for teaching English? That reduced it, okay. How long were you in Korea, if you don't mind me asking?
A year, and then I loved it so much I went back for another month.
A year, and then you went back, okay. Great. And yourself?
Almost 4 years, but my husband was a diplomat, so I was teaching English as the second language.
Wow, that's great. Okay, so 4 years, that's quite some time. And whereabouts were you?
In Seoul.
Daejeon and?
In Seoul.
In Seoul. Okay, anybody else that was teaching English in Korea? Okay, anybody else lived in Korea other than the Koreans in the room? And I have to say, usually when I say, anybody been to Korea before? All the Koreans put their hands up. It's the first time this hasn't happened. Anybody been to Korea for traveling? Okay. How long were you there for?
2.5 weeks.
Yes, I did my job. And yourself? You went to visit her. Ah, okay. Visiting friends and family. Nice, I did my job. Tell my boss about that, okay? That's very good. And your first impressions were, I gotta ask?
That it was very friendly and very busy.
Very friendly and very busy. That's honestly most common feedback that I receive from most Canadians that are visiting Korea for the first time. Seoul only?
No, we did Soju, Nonsan, Busan, Seoul, and a few other locations on route.
Great, okay. So you had quite a different experience because you visited quite a few cities. And the reason I'm mentioning this today is because a little bit later we'll talk about differences between each one of the provinces. The provinces, the pronunciation, and the culture is a little bit different in each one. And each province is famous for something different as well. So we'll talk about that. Here's the lecture portion. I'm not going to bore you, I'll go through it as quickly as I can, but I always try when I meet somebody for the first time and they ask me something different or something new or a personal question, I always try and bring it back to one of these three concepts. So before I get to those three concepts, for those who have met a Korean in the room, and obviously you're here so you've met someone, what was that common first question after you said, oh, my name is... Anybody? Yeah?
Could be how old are you? What university do you go to? How many children do you have? Do they expect boys?
Yeah. Yeah, those are all very common questions. Usually the first one is how old you are. Money does come up at one point or another, but how old you are. And we'll talk about why that is. So that's a very common question. A lot of people do ask that. How old are you? The reason that they're asking for that is they're trying to make a connection with you. The reason they're trying to, it's just like you want to determine whether or not you're friends. And I'll give you an example. Anybody here born in 1980? I'm giving it away for me, myself. All right, we're friends. I'm serious. 1980, we're friends. Anybody born in 79? We're not friends. I'm sorry. You're my older sister, but we're not friends. So that's exactly, you got it. It's that hierarchy, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So there's a different way that we treat each other. So we have to treat each other in different ways. Now, there's always respect involved, but at the same time, we are friends, so we wouldn't have that formality in speak, where we may have it or may not, depending on how close we are, for example. So there's a lot of things like that. Another common question that people ask, are you single? They want to help you out. That's really what it is. Anybody heard of blind dates in Korea? Yeah, anybody been on a blind date in Korea? Oh, let me tell you, they're fun. It's like speed dating on a whole new scale. So they set you up, it's twos, you're sitting across, and they literally have like the timer, the bell, and then they have professional matchmakers they can set you up with as well. It's interesting. But dating culture is a whole new thing, and if you have a Korean girlfriend, boyfriend, wife, etc., we can talk about that later. Or if you have a question, let me know. But the reason that they're asking if you're single, if they find you attractive, maybe they're trying to set you up with someone they know. Again, it's that whole familiarity. We want to be friends, right? So what else have we got that are common questions?
Where's your husband? Exactly.
Where's your husband? Nobody's asked me where my wife is. Where did you study is a very common one. We covered that, yes. Are you married, are you single is a very common one. But they're trying to gain some knowledge into you because they want to make a connection with you. That's very important for Koreans, to make a connection and be personable with you. So we'll talk a little bit about why that is. I try and bring it down to 3 different things. The first one is corporate titles and hierarchy. This is very important. And I'll give you an example. I work in a Korean company. The ambassador mentioned that I work for the Korea Tourism Organization. So typically in our office, we have a director, and we have an office manager, and then we have our staff, the rest of the staff. The office manager, we don't address by their first name. A Korean, typically, if they are older than you or in a corporate atmosphere, you would never address them by their first name. You would address them by, for example, a manager. You'd say, manager. Now, that's a lot like saying, mom, in a mall, and everybody turns around, right? So, in which case, you can go a little bit further, and you can say manager and their first and their last name. First names are typically not used for people who are older than you. If they are younger than you, that may happen. So you may address somebody that is younger than you by their first name. But if they're older, older sister. My friend. So I would address him by his first name. That's okay. Now, that also changes depending on, and there's a lot of hierarchies in there, but I'll give you one step further. When you started in a company, that changes a lot of things too. So the way it works in Korea is they have an entrance exam. And if you pass the entrance exam and you start in the company, they have a hiring season. So they might hire 80 employees that year. So all 80 of you, you're all friends. You all started at the same time, so to speak. Now, you will also meet people who started before you and after you. That plays into the hierarchy as well. Very complicated so far, right? I'll make it easier, don't worry. Harmony. This is an important one as well. So harmony brings it back to trying to be close to you, trying to be together with you. So I'll give you an example. Are you single? If you're single, oh, I have someone that's perfect for you. Want to set you up. That they're trying to recreate that relationship with you. That's one way you can look at it. And again, these are personal examples that I'm giving. Not everybody might see it this way, but this is how I've always thought about it. We do have one more. Collectivism, and the easiest way to think about this one is more a matter of our country, our company, our language. Everything in Korean, when they speak in Korean, they're always talking about our. Now, think of it as more pride, national pride, but at the same time, we do things together, and we do it together because if we do it together, we can do it better, and we can excel, so to speak. But it works the same way when you're talking about a company or a people. So we'll give you a couple examples of these. We're going to start with power, distance, and hierarchy. I've given you 4 examples. What year were you born, where you went to school, when did you start work. These are all ways for somebody to connect with you. And so if I ask you, oh, my name is, I'm sorry, I'll ask, but what is your name? Catherine? Okay, so Catherine, I already know her age, so I'm not going to go there. Catherine and I are in the same company. I'm meeting her for the first time. Oh, Catherine, when did you start working in the company? Last year. Oh, I started in 2010. So now we have a little bit of a conflict. However, I'm still considered senior to her, right? But we're trying to create that bond together so that we can work better together. It's that whole harmony, but also the power distance as well. We've covered this one, never call their first name. This is an important one. I've made this mistake once, and I'll give an example. I was introduced to my mother-in-law for the first time. Never make a mistake with your mother-in-law. This is because this one will haunt you for the rest of your life. So my mother-in-law, her name is Jong-hee, Pa Jong-hee. So Jong-hee, so my wife introduced me to her, and I said, so what is her name? Jong-hee. Okay, so I said, and I said her name, and the mother-in-law looked at me with this look like, ooh, and I'm thinking to myself, what did I do? So I asked my wife a little bit later, is that correct? Should I not have? Oh no, you should address her by her, and you can say Mrs. Hall, for example, or Miss Hall. From then on forward, her name just became Oma. Makes it easy. Go with mom. Decision-making process, so senior-junior relations, so that's where we have this one here. We talked about this as well. So the senior would be myself, the junior would be Catherine, right? And then we also have one more. When we're talking about decisions within a company, and this is where the business side of things comes in, you also have to have your decision confirmed by the top decision maker. So we may go through everything together. So let's suppose that we're on a team. We're the Korea Tourism Organization team. We're the national marketing team. We do have a team, actually. And so we decide that we're going to do something, and our director will be part of that conversation. Yet, once we've finished all the work, just like in any other company, we still need to go forward and confirm that everything has been done correctly, and it's signed off, and he still has a chance to make changes to it, despite the fact that he may have been involved in every process along the way. So there, you'll find that there's a lot of approvals that go along the way, but at every level, the director still has that final say, final approval, despite the fact that they were part of that meeting. Any questions so far? This is the boring part. I promise it'll get better. So harmony, Koreans are always trying to pursue harmony. And when I say by harmony, is trying to find that personal or establish a personal relationship with you. Because they find it easier to do business or to have a relationship or become friends with you. Just because I say that we are not friends, we are friendly. In English, it's the same thing. We can be friends. But in the Korean true friend term, not necessarily. So a little bit different there. And then we get to junior members respect their senior members in many ways. They really do. I'll give you an example. A junior member may bring a senior member coffee. And this happens in every Canadian company as well. That's how a junior member might take care of a senior member. But a senior member will do the same thing by giving or setting examples for the junior member. As well as, and you'll find this in a lot of companies as well, they'll take you out to lunch, they'll take you out to dinner, and it's usually the elder person who pays. Who's the youngest in the room? You're not paying tonight, whoever it is. Congratulations, you don't have to pay. So collectivism is the last one, and this is more of that long-term commitment to the group, right? And what I always try and think about the collectivism thing is, if anybody here is familiar with Korea's history in the 1960s, you remember how harsh things were, but how hard they worked. Very, very long days, and the economic miracle that became of it. So that's an example of collectivism. Everybody worked together very hard to create, and that's where you get the collectivism portion. There's a lot of loyalty that's involved in there too, so it's not always a matter of the rules. Sometimes you do things, you may bend the rules in order to make things better for the group. So I'll give you an example. We might have a company policy that states no more than 2 weeks, and one person has an issue. And I'm just giving an example here. One person has an issue because, my cruise is 15 days, for example. They exist, right? Everybody wants to go on vacation. Well, what the boss may come forward and say, look, I understand your situation, but we need to allow it for everybody, and we'll do this as a one-time thing for everyone. Everyone will be allowed that 15-day vacation. So it's it's sacrifice as well. But it's also the loyalty. The longer you work and try and make things fair for everyone. So they're breaking the rule, but making it fair for all. The last one is, it does take a little bit longer because of the process when you're talking about a company. So, for example, we have to go to the director, we have to go to the manager, and despite the fact that they're in the meeting, we need their rubber stamping along the way. And there are changes that are made even after the fact that, oh, I think we're done with this. We've started the program. Oh, well, we haven't signed the contract yet. Can you go back and see if they'll include design, for example? The boss may come back. Or, it's still a little too much money, we want to cut it down a little bit. So when you're wording, and I always do this, when I'm negotiating with a company, what I'll do is, I need to get final approval, or even though I may think that I have final approval, I'll never actually say that to the company. That way, I don't look bad, and at the same time, our company doesn't look bad. So I'm sacrificing it that way too, right? I want to make sure that they're not finalized until such time as the contract is signed. Once the contract is signed, that's it. And Koreans do respect contracts very well. So there's the most difficult things for today. Greetings. This is going to be the first one, and this is where we'll talk a little bit about those cultural differences. Everybody's met a Korean in the room, I hope. You're here today. Makes sense, right? The last time you met a Korean, the first question after you bowed was what? We talked about this a minute ago. How old are you? That's very good. Okay? Typically they'll ask that, or they may ask where you work or what you do. Greetings are a very, very important one. So this is the subject of greetings, and typically in a business atmosphere, the first thing that happens is they shake your hands, the double handshake. Has anybody had this happen to them? So they reach out, they shake your hand, and then they take the other hand at the same time. They shake your hand with both hands. It's very common. A lot of North Americans might find that a little uncomfortable. They're just trying to become that much closer to you. Think the harmony thing, right? They want to make that personal establishment. I always take this when I receive the double handshake as, oh, this person is really excited to meet me. Take it as a compliment. They really want to meet. That's an important one. Another one that we have. Anything wrong with the picture that you guys see? For the Koreans in the room, you already know. You got it. This is a big no-no. So I've given you a positive one, right? The positive one would be the double handshake. They're trying to make an impression, make you feel good. The negative one, and who's that man in the picture? Bill Gates. He was meeting the president at the time and he had his hand in his pocket. Doesn't show respect. What you'll find a lot of Koreans will do when they're meeting someone for the first time is they will actually put their hand, and you're going to lose my mic here for a minute, but like this. It's almost like they're holding back their coat, so to speak. It's a respectful way to do it. One of the easiest ways to make sure that you're showing respect in any situation, whether you're talking about money, so if you go to a convenience store and you buy a pack of gum, or you're meeting somebody and you're exchanging business cards. Remember, always two hands. It's the easiest thing to remember. Just do everything with two hands and you won't go wrong. You'll be fine. Younger, older, you'll be fine. Easy way to remember it, right? This particular picture, I was in Korea when this one happened. I remember the netizen response. Korean netizens are very, very powerful. And they were not very pleased with the way that it went forward because, again, he wasn't showing respect, but he didn't know. That's the thing. There is a lot of understandings with Koreans that they know that you're not familiar with their culture. So at the same time, they will accept that. But if you want to put the right foot forward, do things with two hands. Makes it easy.
Question.
Yes?
Two people using two hands each, how does that work?
I haven't run into that before.
So it's always the senior to the junior that initiates the handshake, is that it?
Typically, the way things work, and we'll get to this even when we talk about food, for example, the eldest person or the most senior person is the one that would eat first, begin eating first. And he would announce to the group, or he would just begin eating and then you know it's safe for yourself. That's right. But yes, typically the junior person will be the one that is using the two hands, for example, or holding back like this, whereas the senior member, not necessarily. Now, if a senior member or a person in authority were to shake your hand with two hands, remember, for example, the bottom picture here, again, just take it as they're very excited to meet you. They're very happy to meet you. Okay? Here's another one. Business cards. This is a very important one. Business cards and the exchange of business cards, and I'm going to get criticized for this one later. I don't have any business cards with me. I'm out. But business cards are a very important one because it's a proper introduction. Formality in business is very important to Koreans. So the first thing that they'll do is they'll offer their business card and they will offer it with two hands. They'll never put it with one. Remember the two hands, right? Always showing respect. Two hands. And you study. When you receive that business card, always study it with great interest. Oh, this is where your office is. Make small talk about it. For example, oh, your office is on Metcalf, or you work at the embassy, or anything. Even when you look at their title would be very important too. Try and memorize what their title is too. Just helps a little bit. But the fact that you're showing interest in what they do means a lot to them. And you'll notice that they'll do the same with you. They'll study that business card. I wish I could practice with somebody today, but unfortunately, no business cards.
So it seems quite old. I can understand. There's a lot of people concerned about privacy.
For business cards?
Well, not in that
When you meet somebody in a business setting, though, they always provide a business card first. Always. I have never been in a business situation in which a business card is not, oh, well, it's a pleasure to meet you, and they would, it always happens. We're a little bit different in Canada, and that's where our anti-spam regulations come in, et cetera, et cetera. There's nothing like that really in Korea at the moment. It's a business exchange. It's the easiest way to look at it. In a personal setting, those questions will come up, and I can understand that from a North American perspective, but a Korean perspective, very common questions. How old are you? Where do you work? Not so much the money right away, but that does come up at one point or another. Yes?
It says senior or junior based on the age or based on the position. What if people is high ranking but still very young?
Very rare. Excellent question, but very rare. Remember what I was saying before, and it does happen, but remember what I was saying before, that in every year, a company will hire, and I'm just giving you an example, 80 people. So when they hire them, they're typically young, and they stay with a company for life. It's not like the North American model where, would they say in North America, what is it, we have 3 careers in our lifetime? In Korea, not so much. They typically stay for the length of their career with one company. Now, a university, that might be a little bit different, but if you ask even the people that work in government, especially, they all start at the same point, and they slowly work their way up the ranks. It doesn't happen often. What do you do in that situation? That's a great question. I've only run into it once, and it was actually our deputy director who was older than was younger than the manager who had come in. But they still referred to each other as by their titles, because I think the fact that they were just meeting each other. Any other questions? Okay. Yes?
Perhaps you could share your insights into the act of tossing business cards on the table, perhaps presenting it upside down, right? So not facing the other person, as well as your perspective on writing notes on business cards in their presence.
I've not experienced anybody throw a business card at me, not a Korean anyway. North American model, it does happen.
And then your perspective on perhaps that international interaction.
And it does happen a lot. So I'll walk into a business meeting, for example, with one of the companies we do business with, Go-Away. And so I'll meet their product manager for the first time because I want them to develop something for Korea. And if they were to throw me their business card, again, that's not a big deal to me because a lot of North Americans will do business that way, but a Korean will never do that. And I wouldn't say it's disrespectful, but I've had it where they'll put both hands on the business card and slide it with both hands across the table. But it's still 2 hands. It's the easiest way to look at it. Writing notes, again, I've never experienced anybody writing notes. Typically, I'll give you an example. If we were to go to a business meeting together and I am your junior, right, you're the senior member, I would be writing notes throughout the meeting on your behalf. And so what they'll do is they'll line up the business cards above, sitting at the table. So we're sitting across from the ambassador, right? And I've got his business card and it's sitting in front of me. And perhaps his associates is on top of it. And I've got them arranged so that I can address each person by their title properly. But it's sitting on the table in front of me so I can reference them at any time. There's nothing worse than getting the person's name wrong, right?
I think what I meant by that is some people have like course
wait until after, but you're absolutely right.
Yeah, so I mean, from the perspective of, you know, if you're North American and doing that in front of them, it might be considered facing the card, right?
It can be. I wouldn't do it. It's probably the best way to give an example is don't write on the business card, at least not in their presence. Wait until you've returned to your office if you absolutely insist on it. You can write the notes on the back, but certainly don't write it on the front of the card. Write it on the back of the card. And make sure that you don't do it while they're around. Also, for a Korean, never write anything in red on that business card. Certainly not their name. It's an important one. Something about, the easiest way to look at it is superstition. So here's another one. With familiar people, don't be surprised if they intrude upon your personal bubble. This is more of a cultural difference. We're very blessed as Canadians to have such a very large country. So therefore, we have a very large personal bubble. If I stand a little too close to you, that's not a big deal. But think about the way things are in Seoul. You have a population of 10 million people. 25 million if you include Seoul and the surrounding province, right? So everybody gets in from Gyeonggi-do, right? So you got Gyeonggi-do and Seoul combined, you got 25 million people. Everybody gets on the subway, and I'm not saying all 25 million, but you get the idea. It's very cramped, especially first thing in the morning. That idea of a personal bubble is a little bit different in Korea. Okay, so don't be offended if somebody were to bump into you, for example, because that happens quite often as well. It's not that and if they don't say sorry, that's very common too. It's just the way things go in Korea. It's because things are so busy in Seoul. Outside province is a little bit different, but in Seoul specifically, you'll find a lot of people won't necessarily apologize. Whereas Canadians, what do? We both say sorry, and then she'll turn around and, oh, Randy. Right? That's typically the way it goes. But the idea of a personal bubble is very different, just because there are so many people. So don't be offended if somebody stands a little too close. It's not that they're trying to intrude upon your bubble in any way. It's just difference. That's simply it is. And I think a good way to look at a lot of the things that I'm talking about today, this applies more to the older generation, and I'll give you some examples later on, than it does to the younger generation. The younger generation of Koreans nowadays is much more, how would I word this, westernized. So they don't think about things in the same way. We'll get to more of that later. So in a restaurant, this is a big one. I have 2 Korean, I wouldn't call them exchange students, English camp students in my house for the summer. And this is one of the first things that we teach them, because we always take them out to restaurants, we'll take them to family barbecues, we'll take them to just introduce them to Canada, so to speak. But table manners in Korea are very different than they are in Canada. Very, very different. And I'm going to give you some of the examples that I have made mistakes in Korea, and I would like to make sure that you don't make the same. So the first one would probably be, and we'll start with the picture. There are 2 gentlemen at the top. Who do you think is the elder of the 2, based on our conversation so far? Who is the most senior person of the 2? On the left. Why do you say that? You got it, the hand, very good. Very good. So you'll notice that everybody else at the table, even the lady, she's waiting to eat, but she's also perhaps reaching towards her drink. She's waiting until the 2 of them are done. Because again, those 2, the boss or the most senior person is the one that would initiate that. And they might have a company toast, but again, it started with those 2. You can see who the elder person from that is. So the elder person is typically the person who starts eating. You want to wait for them to go first, and then you would continue. Same thing when it works for your boss. Your boss would eat first, and then you know it's safe to eat. And a lot of bosses will say, even if they're not ready to eat and they're talking, they'll say, go ahead, go ahead, go ahead. That's typically the way it works nowadays, but again, just wait until you're given the go ahead or the older person at the table has begun eating. So there's one. It's a sign of respect, is the way they look at it.
How would it be in hometown slowly, especially if the older ones don't appreciate or understand eating
No, so his question was about, and that's a good one. How would a Korean take it if, for example, they had an eating problem? So, for example, they're diabetic or they really need to eat based on some medical need. I think for the most part, Koreans are very understanding. They really are. If it's explained to them why, no problem. But it would be better to explain in advance, I really need to eat, and explain it. So next one, this is a very common one when you go to a company meal in Korea or a lot of traditional Korean restaurants. They're sitting on the floor. Don't be surprised if you go to a Korean restaurant or somebody's house and you sit on the floor. I can only think of 2 meals that I've eaten at my mother-in-law's house that was actually at the Western style table. Everything else was on the floor. They have a small table, 4 legs on it, of course. It's about yay tall, and everybody would sit around the table. Cross-legged, we might have little mats to sit on, we may not, it really depends. Sometimes in the winter it would be on a big heated mat, which makes it even nicer when you're sitting down. But for the most part, meals are eaten on the floor. There are a lot of Western-style restaurants, even Korean-style restaurants that have adopted this, or so I should say the North American model now, where you sit in chairs, but there are a lot of restaurants still that work this way. Another interesting thing for restaurants is, when we go to a restaurant, we're going to go to the keg. What does the keg serve? Steak. Everybody knows they serve steak, right? But what else do they serve? Hamburgers, pasta, really a little bit of everything. Korean restaurants, there are some that are very special restaurants. They may only have 3 or 4 or 5 things on the menu. That's it. And there's all a variation thereof. So it could only be cold noodles, that's all they serve. Or they might only serve chicken ginseng soup or some other minor dish, nothing else. That's all they serve. It's because they're so famous at that, and that's what they do best, that's what they serve. So it's just something to keep in mind. Don't think when you're going to a Korean restaurant, do ask, what are they famous for? What do they eat? Another thing Koreans will do is they'll walk by a restaurant, and I had this happen with my girlfriend a number of times many years ago. We walked by a restaurant, I'd say, what about that place? She's like, no. Why not? There's nobody inside. Well, if there's nobody inside, it can't be very good, right? So we don't want to eat there. We want to eat where there's people. So the more people there are, the more famous it is, the better it must be, right? So again, something to keep in mind when you're looking at restaurants. This is a big one for North Americans. Thankfully, I've only done this once. My brother-in-law was there, and he lectured me on it right away, because apparently I had a cold. I had a bad flu, and I had to blow my nose. He lectured me on it, and then he said right away, I didn't realize you were sick, because he heard me trying to talk, and it didn't work. It didn't come out very well, because of the fact that I wasn't feeling very well. But never blow your nose at the table. I don't know the way we work in North America. I mean, do you blow your nose at the table if you're sick or you're around family? Some people do, but not always. In my family, my mother does quite a bit. She has allergies, but that's okay. Each family is a little bit different. In Korea, this is a big no-no. Don't blow your nose at the table. Another big one. Do you notice anything about the picture? Go ahead. You got it. Don't lift the bowl off the table. It's just a matter of some people will do it, but it's very rare. Most Koreans will not. They will not lift the bowl off the table. The bowl stays on the table, and they'll use their spoon for the rice. The chopsticks are for the other things. And what's interesting, I'm sure many of you have experienced this that have lived in Korea before. Your rice is yours. That's yours. That's the only thing pretty much at the table that is yours. Everything else at the table, so the stews, it might come in one big bowl and it's put on the table. We all eat from the spoon. Because again, and look at it this way, it's harmony. That's the way a family would eat. And it really is. I mean, that's the way families eat in Korea. When you go to a restaurant, a lot of restaurants nowadays, and this is why I say the younger generation are really changing things, you'll find that they'll have a ladle on the table and they will serve it separately. So they'll have separate bowls, but it's not always the case. So all I'm saying is don't be surprised if you go to somebody's house and they may, if you're for a Western, they may say, okay, well, we'll provide you with an extra bowl and a ladle, but you may find that they just expect you to eat it with your spoon. There are many different situations for that. So before we move to my favorite one, drinking culture, and this is a big one for Korea, has anybody else noticed anything different about Korean restaurants or Korean table manners? Anything of different? No? Okay. If you think of something later, please do mention it. So drinking culture is a big one. A common question once you get to know someone you really well will be, how many beers can you drink? They like to ask that question. I think it's a matter of your drinking strength. And this is a very common one, how many bottles of soju can you drink? I'm only good for like a half bottle, I promise. That's all I can do. Soju is just not my thing. But it's a very common question. They're trying to establish your drinking strength. And one of the biggest things that I've noticed is if I tell somebody, oh, I can sit down and I'll have 12 beer, and they'll look at me and go, okay, we're drinking tonight. And that person will sit across from me the rest of the evening. It's an interesting, they just want to, they're trying to, it's that hierarchy, but more collectivism harmony. We're trying to become friends that way. This brings up another one when it comes to food and to drink. You never drink alone in Korea. Anybody watch Korean dramas? Okay, a few. You ever notice they're always crying and sad when they're sitting there drinking by themselves? Koreans don't like to drink by themselves. They always want to drink with someone. It's very important for them. So, you'll never drink alone in Korea. So here are some of the things that we'll talk about for drinking culture.
Question?
Yes?
Does gender play in there? Like,
Or
are
drinking?
women expected to be able to drink 12 beers, or
No. And it's...
more of a thing among men?
Things are changing very quickly. I should probably mention this. So, a lot like North American society, the idea of over-drinking or drinking too much is not a good thing. And it is very much recognized in Korea. And so nowadays, you'll find a lot of people will not drink when they go to a company outing. And refusing a drink is okay. Once upon a time, you didn't refuse a drink, but nowadays it's acceptable to say, no, I'm not going to drink. Company culture, and I'll talk about just the business side of things. When the boss says, we're going out to dinner tonight, that means everybody's going out to dinner. It used to be, you can't refuse. Now, the polite thing to do, and we'll talk, this gets into drinking culture in a minute, I'll go for dinner, but it doesn't finish at just dinner. What's next? For those who lived in Korea, you know, what's next? Well, you already said a part of it. Karaoke, could be. Karaoke's the end of the night, though. You need icha first. And so there's the bar hopping stage, right? So we'll go to somewhere else, where maybe we'll have just beer for the second stage, and the third stage maybe we'll go to a karaoke, and we'll sing and we'll drink there. But typically the way it goes nowadays is somebody will come for the dinner, they'll say that they're going to the second place, and they disappear, or they tell their boss that, oh, I have to go, because they don't want everybody to disappear, and that's the polite thing to do. It's not common that everybody goes to the second and third bar anymore. Yes?
What are the ideal numbers if somebody asks you how much you can drink?
Be honest, really.
Right? Like
Just
what-
be honest.
but
If you're
what-
not a big drinker, tell them right off the bat, I'm not a big drinker.
But what if you are a big, like,
No.
because I will say my experience is, I could drink everybody that we hung out with under the table.
Right?
Is that all right? Or should I have been holding back to be more respectful?
I think by the point that you've on that second or third bottle of soju, it doesn't matter anymore, as long as everybody's having a good time. The most important thing, and we'll get to this one a little bit later, I'll give you an example of a karaoke room. If you're on, everybody throughout the evening is singing very, very upbeat, happy songs, and then all of a sudden somebody comes along and sings a sad love song, you might get, an evil eye from somebody in the room, or you might have brought down the mood of the group, so it's probably best not to do that. Remember, try and stay upbeat throughout the whole thing. You want to be happy throughout the whole thing. You don't want to bring down the mood of anyone, and facial expressions do mean a lot. But to get to your question, I wouldn't lie. I would just tell them, I like drinking. So how many is that? I don't think they would actually ask you a second time. I think once is enough. If you just say, I like drinking, they'll get the hint. I went on 2 weeks ago, we had somebody from our head office come to Vancouver. And they were told in advance that I liked beer. And I was coming out to Vancouver as a favor, I was told, to help them do some interviews with people. And so because I was told, someone had told the incoming people that I liked beer. Based on that, okay, so we're going out drinking tonight. And we're having beer. And so after the first dinner, we had beer with dinner, they said, okay, that's it. So one of the guys left, and the other guy says, so I hear you like beer. I'm like, Yeah, who doesn't like beer? Let's go. Okay, so we went off to round 2, and then round 3, and that was it. I mean, we had to be up early in the morning, but you get the idea. The word will spread if you like beer. Or soju, whatever your drink happens to be. Yes?
I've heard that when you're in Korea, it's more polite if you're younger, like the older finish for you. Is that?
I've never run into that. That would be a good question for one of the Koreans in the room. But typically, because there's so much food in Korea and there's always so much on the table, you've seen a typical platter, the way a Korean table works, right? There's so much food. Just pick, eat slowly, because there's going to be so much. And when you go to Icha, and this is a big one when it comes to drinking, there is always food on the table when you're bar hopping. Koreans never just drink. They drink and eat, unless it's in a Korean drama, in which case they're just drinking by themselves. But there's always food on the table. So to answer your question, they should finish, for the older people should finish first. I would think in that situation that everybody should be finished at the same time, but I haven't run into that. That's a good question, though. I'll look into that. Yes?
You were saying the woman should drink by herself. Now,
Oh no, everyone.
if I
Men too.
If I go to a restaurant by myself, am I not allowed to have a glass?
No, of course, go ahead.
And they don't feel that sad?
You may find that somebody may come and join you. I've had that happen before.
Because you're not a woman.
True. Would you go to a bar in North America by yourself and have a drink, though?
Yes.
Yeah, right? So don't let it stop you there. But you may find that they're more talkative with you. I have run into that.
That's okay. I'm talking.
There you go, perfect. You meet a new friend. They'll ask you how old you are.
It happens in many countries in Asia too.
Yes?
I was reading in this magazine that it says, bad form to fill your own glass, especially if the glass is for soju or other alcohol.
You are absolutely right.
The ritual goes as follows: watch out for others' empty glasses around the table, lift the bottom, and offer them a drink to signal you're friendly. Pour enough, but don't fill it to the top. And finally, accept the drink from them. Is that right?
You got it, yes. That's a mouthful, but you're absolutely right. This brings me to, I think it's slide number 1. There we go. Slide number 1, never pour your own drink. Remember that you're never drinking alone. And so typically the junior will serve the senior. It's typically the way it goes. Now it doesn't always work that way. The boss may say, oh Randy, you did a really good job. And he'll pour me a drink. In which case I am to accept it. An older generation, sometimes this comes into play as well. What will happen is, Randy, you've done a really good job. He'll offer me his glass. He'll fill it for me. I drain it in one shot, then I fill it back for him, and he does the same. That's also a very common one. But typically, there is one person sitting at the table, the youngest person, that's always looking around to see if anybody's glass is empty, because you are to fill it. And you never overfill it. It's a small shot glass, about yay big, but you're leaving about, say, ½ an inch at the top or so. Very, very important. Any other questions? Okay. So don't pour your own drink. Don't be surprised when asked how much you can drink. We covered that one. And then bar hopping is a common practice. Very, very common. So when the company says that we're going out to dinner, it's not usually just one stop. They'll go to 2 or 3 stops. It's very rare that they'll go for 4. The company usually pays for 1. The boss will usually pay for 1. And then if it continues, it kind of goes down the line in terms of who's paying. Koreans are very conscious of how much something is, and they don't want you to make you feel uncomfortable at the same time. So, and the other thing is, if you decide that you want out, again, just disappear. Tell your boss, I'm really tired, I got to be up in there early in the morning. Nowadays, it's more and more accepted. Any questions about drinking? It's a very important part of Korean culture. Yes?
More of a comment, but
Sure.
the Indian culture,
Yes.
one of the things is Koreans show that it speaks the opposite noodles by slurping.
Yes.
And then the opposite of Canadian culture.
So that's one of the difficulties that I'm having with one of my camp students at the moment. Like I said, table manners are very different in Korea than they are in Canada, for example. So noodles, you are absolutely right, and I'm told this all the time, although I don't agree, but it's up to you. They'll be eating a bowl of janjiguksu or naengmyeon or something, and they'll slurp it up. And the fact that they're slurping it makes it more delicious. That's what they'll tell you. Just don't be offended if that's what they do, because to them, it makes it more delicious. Something about, I was actually told this a couple weeks ago, the sucking in of the air, I don't know. Also, the texture of the noodle comes out when they're slurping it, and anyway, remember that they are different. What I'm trying to say by the eating culture is that it's very different for North Americans than it is for Koreans. So when in Korea, don't blow your nose at the table. But do be respectful that they don't pick up their bowl. So make sure you leave that down. And don't be surprised with people talking with their mouth full too. Again, that's not rude in Korea. That's the way a lot of people, because of conversation, right? They want to keep the conversation going. We have very different table manners. So a lot of things that we do are very, very, blowing your nose, for example, rude in Korean culture. Yes? Rum, no. The most common drinks in Korea you'll find are soju. Soju is very popular. Men and women, and they have different flavors of soju too. So they'll have pomegranate, they'll have grapefruit, they'll have blueberry, they'll have, the list goes on, and then they'll have something called baekseju, which is like supposed to make you live to be 100. We should all have some more of that. They also have something called makgeolli, which is like a rice wine, a fermented rice wine. Some of them will be carbonated. Some of them still have rice at the bottom of them. And then beer. Beer is starting to gain in popularity as well. Those are typically the most common drinks that you'll find in Korea. They do have cocktail bars, so you'll find like an actual North American style bar where they will make real cocktails, but tend to be a little bit more pricey. And I do want to bring up something. Does anybody here travel to Korea for business and often bring gifts? So a very common one for if you have a man that you're going to be buying a gift for, and if it's a business gift, whiskey, for example, is a very expensive item in Korea. Very, very expensive. They love their Johnny Walker. Okay? So it's an excellent gift. Whiskey is a very, very good gift. But they really do like their alcohol. My father-in-law, for example, every time I go and visit Korea, I always bring him a bottle. He never drinks it. Sits in a cabinet. He shows it off to all his friends when he comes over. One day he's going to give that back to me. But it's an excellent gift. So any questions about liquor? Okay. The next one we have is just in general. Cultural differences among provinces. This is where Korea really gets interesting. South Korea, I should say specifically, is a very small country, as you're familiar with. So to give you an example, to drive from Incheon, so the west corner, all the way down to the southeast corner of Busan would probably take you about 6.5 hours by car. It's not very large, right? And it's a very large population. You're looking at about, what, 50, 55 million people, somewhere in there? Okay? So what's important to notice here, though, is that each province is famous for something different. Each province will have a different dialect, especially when you get down to the island of Jeju. So the people from the island of Jeju, very, very different. When they speak, they actually sound like they're speaking a different language. It's that different. Koreans will have trouble, in many cases, understanding what people from Jeju are saying. But what's interesting about it is they all watch the same TV, they all listen to the same radio, right, other than local broadcasts. They're all watching the same television shows, the famous Saturday night television. They're all watching the same thing. Just very different that way too. So what I want to say here is that the English level and their enthusiasm or the sound of their voice, their dialect, their intonation will change in every province. So I'll give you an example. Our deputy director is actually from an area called, well, you'll see it in the bottom right-hand corner, Gyeongsangnam-do. So she's from Gyeongsangnam-do. And when she speaks Korean or in English, she always sounds like she's angry. She says it's because of my dialect, she gets very excited. It's just the way she is. Not every Korean is like that, but I'm just giving you a couple examples of different people. It's the same thing in Canada, Newfoundland. People from Newfoundland sound slightly different with their pronunciation, their intonation, than people from Ontario, for example, right? Especially from Quebec, everybody sounds a little bit different. So that's something to keep in mind, and that will reflect in their English as well. This is a very important one. Would you like some tea? No. but it doesn't finish there. You should ask again, and then once more. Not 3 times in a row, but we have a conversation. So, your name is, I'm sorry? Bruce. Okay, Bruce. Hi, Bruce, I'm Randy. Nice to meet you. It's a pleasure. So, Bruce, how was your drive in? Bruce tells me it was drive. Bruce, would you like some coffee? We're here for a business meeting, right? Would you like some coffee? Okay, no, Bruce, okay. We'll continue the conversation, but Bruce, you sure you don't want a coffee? You're sure? Okay. Bruce, can I get you something to drink? Would you like, after a couple more minutes of conversation? The reason I'm asking 3 times is, the way a Korean thinks about this is, the first time you ask, I don't want to put you out, right? I don't want to cause you any stress by asking you if you want a coffee or tea or water or something. The second time, maybe he doesn't really want me to have any, I'm just going to say no, make it easy for him. The third time, oh yeah, okay. If you get a 3 no's in a row, you know they don't want any coffee, okay? But 3 times. Typically, you're going to ask 3 times. And it doesn't go, it's not the same for beer, I promise. Korean will usually tell you yes for beer the first time. I just mean when you're having a meeting, or if you've invited somebody to your house, typically try and ask them 3 times and spread it out, make it more casual. Again, they just want to make sure that you're not being put out by the fact that you have to make coffee, because they don't want to cause you any unneeded stress. So it's an important one. I know, he's a famous man. Not important. Look at the expression on his face. How do you think he's feeling? Anyone? Happy, sad, angry? Neutral? Oh, really? You see neutral there? Okay, worry? I was going to say he doesn't look very happy. Facial expressions mean a lot to Koreans. A lot. And so what you'll find is, and I'll give you an example, if you go red-faced based on something, that could mean that you are either embarrassed or angry right away. So you have to be very careful of your facial expressions. You always want to portray or be happy at all times. It's not necessarily a negative thing if you do show your true emotion, because you can't help it sometimes, right? I'll give you an example. My boss will say, oh yeah, Randy, we want to go forward with that project after all. And I'm thinking, I just told the guy no. I just got off the phone with him 15 minutes ago. And it's the look of shock, but try and get over that. You know what I mean? Facial expressions are very, very important to Koreans. And they're very good, excellent poker players, really. Don't ever play poker with a Korean. They're very good. Again, it's all about the mood, okay? This is one of the last ones that I've got. This has to do with their English. And I'll give a personal example of this one. I arrived in Korea in 2002. The city that I lived in, Gwangju, Jeollado, Gwangju, only had about 2.5 million people. I want to say there were 100 foreigners in the city total. That's it. And again, I'm giving an estimate of that, but I think I knew every single one of them. I played on the foreign soccer team, and there was one foreign bar in town, and you get to know all the people in the town, right? It was just prior to World Cup, and that was Korea's true opening to the world, right? So you had 1988 Seoul Olympics, everything opens up, and people are looking at Korea. And then in 2002, people really started to flood in, and that's where you saw that whole English boom start in Korea, right? And so English just started to take off. And again, that's conversation English. I don't mean studying grammar, etc. So when you speak with someone, and their English may sound, don't do that, or do not do that, they're using very strong terms. It's not because necessarily that they feel that they feel very strongly about something. It could simply be their level of English. And after a couple of minutes conversation, you'll know that. But don't take it to heart, is all I'm trying to say. There are different levels of English in Korea. So you'll have everybody from, let's say, the older generation. If they speak Korean or English very, very well, the reason for that could be that they had something to do with the army. They could have lived overseas. But for the most part, the younger generation speak the English very, very well as well. So there's different levels in there too. You'll find a more formal English in the older generation, or a more informal English in the younger generation. So there's that gap as well. So there's a lot of differences there. Any questions about facial expressions? I usually get a lot on that. Yes?
We're reading the book again. There's a term for it called
Nunchi, yes. Nunchi, okay. And what else does the book say about Nunchi?
Just what you said, it's very important. I mean, the Koreans are excellent readers of silence, and they know what a person is thinking.
You're absolutely right. So we'll be sitting in a meeting, and I mentioned my red face might have come up. That flash of anger, my boss will see that. In a North American setting, not necessarily, but Koreans are very good at picking up on emotion and picking up on facial expressions. I'm not saying you have to hide anything by any means, but what I am trying to say is they're very good at that, and they're also, that's why I say don't play poker with them, but it's very, you want to put that best cultural foot forward. So you want to make sure that you're able to keep a happy and presentable face at all times, especially when you're negotiating with a Korean. Because if you smile for any reason, or, oh, I got exactly what, they'll know. They know right away. Koreans are very good negotiators. But Nunchi is a good example. Yes, that's basically, they're able to see those things. Koreans pick up on a lot of subtleties very easily. Things that maybe the rest of you pick up on, but I don't, for example. Any other questions?
What
Yes.
about eye-to-eye contact, staring, things like that? Is that an issue in Korea?
I think I've lost my mic. Eye-to-eye contact. It is important for Koreans to keep eye contact, but you're not necessarily looking at the ground. You need to keep both in there. But staring at someone doesn't happen too often, no. You won't find somebody staring deep into your eyes unless, of course, they're in love with you, in which case that's a different story. We can talk about dating culture in a minute if you like. You had a question? Okay. No. So the two-handed thing would generally be... So the two-handed thing, oh, this is a great one. The two-handed thing is generally for the younger person would present to the older person, right? The two-handed, oh, I see what you mean. The two-handed handshake, you don't have to do that. I've never done that. Again, the same thing. So I would do the same with you. I would hold mine just like this. So I don't need the two hands. You don't need the two hands unless you're very excited to meet me. She's high-ranking and she's holding two hands to shake my hand. I am very, very appreciative of that. Right, so I'll pretend that you're the Korean and I'm the younger man I'm meeting. And you are the high-ranking female Korean. You just shake my hand as you normally would. No need, unless you're very excited to meet me. I would be very happy if you are. Okay? Yeah, that's sure you can if you like. Again, you are North American. That's an excellent question. So hugs, not something that happens in Korea. It's always a bow. If a Korean is meeting a Korean, if they're friends, doesn't matter men or women, they typically don't shake hands too much. It does happen, but it's more the bow, right? Very formal unless they know each other fairly well, in which case it would be a handshake. But that applies to men and to women. Hugs? No. No, for the most part, no. Not in the elder generation that I've seen. The younger generation, even my wife, she doesn't hug any of her friends. They have this personal bubble. Like, again, I can stand this close to you, but I won't hug you. I've done it before, but you may find that they'll be shocked. They may be shocked by it. Yeah, and I understand that. I went to and I'll give you a perfect example. I went to my brother-in-law's wedding in March of this year. And so my wife's aunt and uncle, all of the aunts and uncles, everybody, it was a big family, they were all there. And the aunt approached me, and I knew her very well. So I came up and I gave her a hug. She didn't know what to do. Unusual for her. And it was the same, so it's very rare to see hugs, even between female and female. You don't see it so often. Yeah. That's okay. Well, the thing is, if you've met them here, again, they're more westernized that, right? And you are so, as much as Korea, we want to be a part of Korea, we have an understanding that we're not really a part of Korea because we are foreigners, based on the way we look, right? We're not Korean, we don't speak Korean, we don't say our country when we speak, so it's okay. That's the best thing about Korea. Even if you do put a wrong step forward by accident, Koreans are so understanding that it's not a big deal. You've done okay. But the fact that you've made an effort by pouring someone's drink with 2 hands, remember you always pour with 2 hands, you give money with 2 hands, you accept business cards with 2 hands. The fact that you've made an effort makes a big deal to Koreans. Koreans love that. Very important to them. So you've made an effort. Koreans love it even more if you attempt to speak Korean with them. Even if you just say hello. That's all. They're very impressed by that. You have made an effort in their language. 안녕하세요. Or 안녕하십니까. Whatever you want to go with. 안녕하세요. Or do you want, we'll just go a very easy one. 안녕하세요. 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 Okay. I'm sorry? How do you say goodbye? Who's leaving? We're getting more complicated now. If you're leaving or if I'm leaving. Oh, hi. 안녕? Yeah. Okay, 안녕 would be a very good example as well. But you would only say that to friends. Or somebody who is younger that you're very familiar with as well.
They're always younger than I am.
How much can you drink? But very good, a good example. Yes?
What do Koreans about like K-dramas and the TV show where boys and like what do they think about the dating? Are they very different from what we do in real life?
Oh, there is definitely a difference. However, dating culture plays a big part of that too. So, okay, we'll start with that because that's almost like a 2-part question. How many people in the room have watched a Korean drama before? Fair number. Okay, so this applies to a lot of you. What you see in a Korean drama, Koreans know is not real life because it's a drama. But a lot of the things that you see happen in that are true real life situations. So some of the dramas, and I'll give you an example, might be that the guy breaks up with the girl because, and this is more old style, but the guy breaks up with the girl because he doesn't have any money to go take her out on dates anymore. That could be one example. Happens. Another one will be the guy holds the umbrella and the woman's purse. That's a very common one too when you're dating. So that does happen. So there are certain things that happen and certain things that don't. Guys wearing makeup, do you mean things like that? That does happen in Korea too. It's very common. When I go to Korea, I feel underdressed no matter where I go. Even if I'm wearing a suit, I don't feel I look good enough because they all look so good all the time. So, is that what you meant? Okay. Anybody else?